Dreams can be beautiful, but we all have to wake up eventually. Countless studios have come and gone in the long history of film. Some become seemingly unstoppable titans. Others quietly chug along with minor hits. But none have so publicly and strangely burst onto the scene and flamed out as DreamWorks Pictures. In 1994, three titans of Hollywood entertainment came together to form DreamWorks SKG, so named after its three founders, Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen. Each man had a goal they sought to achieve by founding the first new major live-action and animation studio in decades. Freedom, revenge, power. For a short time, DreamWorks positioned itself as a revolutionary force within entertainment, a place where artists could freely create without meddling executives and the disrupting forces of commerce. It was to be the anti-Disney, the resurrection of the old Hollywood system, and a futurist vision of art. And yet, for all its lofty goals and the prestige brought by both its founders and major contributors, DreamWorks became a cautionary example of failure on the largest scale possible. Soon after its launch, DreamWorks gave birth to 8 different divisions and subsidiaries, but all of them, except for DreamWorks Animation, are now largely defunct. During its time, DreamWorks promised many great things, and I think for some it's a studio that evokes a sense of nostalgia for a different time in movie making. But just how many great DreamWorks creations can you actually name? So what stopped a studio that seemed poised to take over every pillar of the entertainment industry? And was there really any hope for it in the first place? From its massive early ambitions to its disappointing fate, this is the sudden rise and painful fall of DreamWorks. Last year I made a video about the death of the Disney Renaissance, and beyond a series of bad choices and overreach, a critical factor in both Disney's rebirth and recession was the tumultuous relationship between Michael Eisner, CEO and chairman of the Walt Disney Company, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, chairman of Walt Disney Studios. But the working relationship between these two soon soured after the death of Disney president Frank Wells in a helicopter crash. Katzenberg wanted the now open position. Eisner denied him it and took on the responsibilities himself. And soon Katzenberg was forced out of the company on August 25, 1994. To the media, both men said it was amicable, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. And this is where our story picks up. Ousted from Disney, Katzenberg sought a way forward to not only prove that he was worthy of the position he was denied, but create a studio better than Eisner's. Something with multimedia ambitions that would flourish under his close watch. But Katzenberg couldn't do it alone, and soon turned to two Hollywood titans. Steven Spielberg, maybe the most powerful director in the industry, who by this point had already made Jaws, E.T., 3 Indiana Jones movies, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and more, gaining both massive box office and awards prestige. Spielberg and Katzenberg were already friends and business partners in the opening of the sub-themed Hollywood restaurant Dive. Not a bad idea, I'd rather eat there than watch ants again. The other was David Geffen, music talent agent and manager who co-founded Asylum Records and then Geffen Records before creating the Geffen Film Company, becoming deeply embedded in the US political scene of the 90s, and generally throwing his wealth around. Geffen played the role of mentor to Katzenberg during his time at Disney, creating even more business ties and enemies that only increased with the founding of DreamWorks. To start off DreamWorks, Katzenberg, Spielberg, and Geffen each contributed $33 million and sought out more funds from investors. $500 million of that came from Paul Allen, Microsoft co-founder and an investor with ties to sports teams, scientific institutes, and more, giving Allen an 18% stake in the company. And on October 12, 1994, the trio officially announced their new business venture, attracting a media swarm who had already learned of the pending announcement through a leak. Hollywood studios were at their zenith when they were driven by point of view and personalities, said Spielberg. Together with Jeffrey and David, I want to create a place driven by ideas and the people who have them. I regard Jeffrey and David as pioneers. I'd like to be one too. DreamWorks was presented to the media as an equal partnership between the three men, each bringing a vision that had publicly shaped film and music over the past decades. Later, Geffen would say that Katzenberg willed DreamWorks into existence. On the day of the announcement, Katzenberg would say, "There's an opportunity for us to have a revolution." What would that revolution be? Well, over the next several years, as DreamWorks amassed investors and gathered writers, directors, animators, and other creators, often poached from rival studios with the promise that DreamWorks would give them free artistic reign in their projects, the SKG business would open not just its central live-action studio, but animation, TV, video game, and music divisions, all launched within just a few years of each other during the mid-90s. DreamWorks had ambitions of being the biggest studio around, a contender in nearly every major type of media. We'll see how this inverse, top-heavy plan quickly fell apart, but within these first few years, DreamWorks didn't exactly live up to the hype created by having these mogul founders stating their lofty ambitions years before a single product hit the market. The first DreamWorks product was a TV sitcom called Champs, premiering on January 9th, 1996, and only airing 12 episodes before it was cancelled. The first DreamWorks record was George Michael's Older on May 14th, 1996, which peaked on the US charts at number 6. And finally, the first DreamWorks Pictures film to make it to theaters was The Peacemaker on September 26, 1997, which made $110 million against its $50 million budget. As a movie I would best describe as a Jack Ryan film with all the excitement and political relevance surgically removed. While Spielberg wasn't contractually obligated to make his films at the studio, his film Amistad at the end of '97, produced by HBO but distributed by DreamWorks, brought some of the prestige the studio was looking for early on. But largely, DreamWorks struggled to make any real magic happen during the second half of the 90s. Meanwhile, Disney was undergoing a series of ups and downs under Eisner. The biggest controversy, and the decision that angered the DreamWorks founders the most, was the hiring of Michael Ovitz as president of the Walt Disney Company. Ovitz was the co-founder of Creative Artists Agency, and Spielberg's personal agent all the way up to the founding of DreamWorks. Ovitz had been meeting with Eisner about taking the job that had been denied to Katzenberg, while also helping Katzenberg and partners hammer out the deals of their new company. So yeah, they were pissed. Ovitz would only serve as Disney president for 16 months, a reign largely deemed a total disaster. But the betrayal, combined with Katzenberg suing Disney for millions of dollars in owed bonuses, fully cemented the two companies as bitter rivals. According to journalist Nicole LaPorte's fantastic book, The Men Who Would Be King, which is an invaluable look at DreamWorks and the many contentious and souring relationships that both built and destroyed it, Geffen hated Ovitz even more than Katzenberg. And according to one of the book's sources, Geffen said about Ovitz, "I'm gonna kill that motherfucker. It may take me years, but I'm going to destroy him. Watch me." What's crucial to note is that while DreamWorks was founded with aspirations of being the ultimate multimedia giant, the company lacked a distribution wing. This meant they had no infrastructure in place to put its films in theaters, on video, or eventually online. Instead, DreamWorks had to strike deals with other companies, often with studios they were in direct competition with. And the effects of these deals had a direct impact on the many successes and failures of the SKG studio. The founding of DreamWorks came as somewhat of a shock to the team at Amblin Entertainment, which Spielberg had co-founded with Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall in 1969. In the decades that followed, Amblin was the warm and fuzzy studio that brought you such family classics as E.T., Goonies, Back to the Future, An American Tail, Hook, Jurassic Park, and more. Before DreamWorks, Amblin was synonymous with Spielberg, often working in partnership with Universal Pictures. But with Spielberg as chairman and DreamWorks looking for a home, the new SKG group began operating out of Amblin's Universal City headquarters until they had their own space. It's the type of messy, mixed up, constantly in flux relationship that would come to define the company. Amblin would chug along over the following decades, with Spielberg still allowed to have his fingers in many different pies due to the freedom afforded by his DreamWorks deal. But it was no longer the golden child to Hollywood's most powerful director. For a studio looking to establish both its financial strength and prestige, there were two things that mattered: box office and awards. DreamWorks' search for success found several major competitors in film. Of course, there was Disney's animated division. Largely, this was the byproduct of Katzenberg and Eisner's animosity. Katzenberg was in the midst of a lawsuit against Disney that claimed Katzenberg was owed 2% of the profits of the many movies he worked on during his time there, which the company claimed he forfeited by leaving before the end of his contract. But with mounting decisions in favor of the fired exec, it was claimed that Eisner once said, "I hate the little midget," and pressure from Geffen, Disney settled out of court in 1999 for $250 million. In a strictly business sense, Disney Disney and DreamWorks went to war at the theater with several competing animated movies in the early years. Ants on October 2nd, 1998 versus A Bug's Life on November 20th, followed closely by The Prince of Egypt on December 18th. The Road to El Dorado on March 31st, 2000, and Chicken Run on June 23rd versus Dinosaur on May 19th. Shrek on May 18th, 2001 versus Atlantis: The Lost Empire on June 15th. Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron on May 24th, 2002 versus Lilo and Stitch on June 21st. Some of these battles DreamWorks won, some they lost. But it was also the time when Disney had entered its post-Renaissance slow descent into failure and overall struggle. The iron was hot for DreamWorks to strike. On the live-action front, DreamWorks' major competitor was Miramax, led by the Weinsteins. By the time DreamWorks had gotten its first films into theaters, Miramax was already a well-established machine with an intense focus on ruthless award season campaigning for its homegrown films and snatching up foreign films for US distribution. But beyond its hatchet job of The Thief and the Cobbler, a fascinating disaster worthy of its own video, it wasn't an animation studio. In 1997, Miramax won their first Best Picture for The English Patient. Then, in 1999, Miramax won Best Foreign Language Film for Life is Beautiful and Best Picture for Shakespeare in Love, beating out DreamWorks' first true awards contender and one of Spielberg's most important films, Saving Private Ryan. The next 3 years would belong to DreamWorks, with American Beauty, Gladiator, and A Beautiful Mind all bringing home Best Picture for the studio back to back to back, knocking off several Miramax nominees in the process. Afterward, the original DreamWorks would secure a few more nominations, but never win another Best Picture Oscar. And while the story of Miramax would make for its own horrifying video, what's most important in relation to DreamWorks is that it won their war, staying a prolific studio for much longer and capturing ongoing prestige that the SKG group never could. So it seems like, after a rough start, DreamWorks was finally finding the success its launch promised. But this is, of course, the story of a fall. So, what happened? Well, it was really several different things. The beginning of the 21st century brought as many broken dreams as realized ones to the studio, with big projects such as a lavish studio backlot in Playa Vista cancelled, and several divisions struggling and eventually closing down. Mounting debt, frustrated investors and artists, and a failure to deliver on lofty promises were the norm less than a decade after the studio was announced. And movie after movie, DreamWorks films were simply not profitable enough, with films like The Island, War of the Worlds, and Wallace and Gromit actually losing millions for the company, landing them in $400 million of debt. Without the help of its animation wing, we'll get to that in a minute, the studio was desperate for a way out. Initially, DreamWorks courted General Electric to be purchased, but the mega conglomerate simply saw them as not profitable enough. So in December 2005, Spielberg, Geffen, and Katzenberg sold DreamWorks to Viacom for $1.6 billion, completed on February 1st, 2006. The independent studio was now part of Paramount, about which Katzenberg said they were gonna fix them from the inside. You probably won't be surprised to learn that things did not go well between the DreamWorks and Paramount teams, with Paramount seeing the new acquisition as a boutique label within their business, and DreamWorks, and Spielberg in particular, demanding complete autonomy from Paramount. The two sides fought viciously in particular over Dreamgirls, an adaptation of the Broadway musical that was actually owned by Geffen, causing the co-founder to become deeply entrenched in every decision about the movie, and fight with Paramount over credit and attention. The thing is, DreamWorks did really well at Paramount, with Transformers, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Blades of Glory, Disturbia, and more being big hits. But Spielberg, Geffen, and more of the DreamWorks top brass were absolutely itching to get out of Paramount. So, at the end of 2008, DreamWorks, with a hefty investment from financier group Reliance, left Paramount 3 years after they joined to form a new, smaller, independent DreamWorks 2.0. The studio kept their branding, and Paramount got their library of content, essentially stripping the company of the catalog that it could rely on for steady income. Geffen took this change to officially fully divest from DreamWorks. A decade and a half after co-founding the company, he was out for good. But DreamWorks was confident that good things were ahead. The massive recession they were in said otherwise. As we keep diving into the highs and lows of the studio, it can be easy to lose track of the many divisions within it and what happened to them. So let's give our doomed studio a little diagnostic. DreamWorks Animation, which lasted from 1994 until it was spun off into its own publicly traded company in 2004. The history of DreamWorks Animation is interlaced with the entire fate of the studio, so we won't cover it all in this section, but during its tenure as a division of the larger studio, they produced 10 animated feature films, beginning with Ants in 1998 and ending with Shark Tale in 2004. From the start, DreamWorks Animation was the domain of Katzenberg, seemingly exiled there by Geffen due to his controlling tendencies, and becoming the most consistently profitable and dependable arm of the studio. DreamWorks Television, which lasted from 1994 through 2013. The studio's first big splash in the industry was really like watching someone fall down a real long flight of steps. Its biggest success, Spin City, lasted 6 seasons and ran from 1996 to 2002, keeping the studio afloat while just about every other show in its first decade couldn't get past 2 seasons. Freaks and Geeks and Undeclared, cult classics from a then unknown Judd Apatow, only lasted 1 season each. Father of the Pride, a DreamWorks animation experiment, cost $2.5 million per episode in 2004. While Band of Brothers, Las Vegas, Rescue Me, and The Pacific could really only be called the other true hits. Only alive thanks to its consecutive distribution deals with ABC, NBC, and Netflix, DreamWorks TV was blobbed into Amblin Television in 2013. DreamWorks Interactive, lasting from 1995 through 2000. An initial $30 million joint investment from DreamWorks and partner Microsoft, made possible by negotiations by Spielberg, a self-described game addict, DWI made a lot of forgettable games. But its biggest success, Medal of Honor, inspired by Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, was counterbalanced by Jurassic Park Trespasser, one of modern gaming's great failures. I mean, of course you should take Spielberg's advice on making video games. It wasn't like he was involved in a game that almost killed the American video game industry or anything. Oh. In 2000, DWI and Medal of Honor were acquired by EA when DreamWorks lost interest in gaming. It was then rebranded EA Los Angeles, then Danger Close Games, and then they stopped making Medal of Honor games and closed the studio. DreamWorks Records, from 1996 to 2003. David Geffen's Baby, DreamWorks Records debuted with George Michael's Older, which went platinum in the US and around the world, before blending soundtracks to DreamWorks films with a variety of established artists a little past their prime but with existing relationships with Geffen. Eventually, DreamWorks helped new artists like Nelly Furtado, Papa Roach, the All-American Rejects, and more break out in the early 2000s, while Toby Keith sold massive amounts of records under the DreamWorks Nashville imprint. But DreamWorks' biggest competition wasn't another studio. It was Napster. The rise of online torrenting ate into the studio's profits, as well as everyone else's, and led to DreamWorks selling the label at the end of 2003 to Universal. DreamWorks Home Entertainment, lasting from 1998 through 2006. The home media division in charge of putting the company's movies on video, DreamWorks Home Entertainment actually needed Universal Studios Home Entertainment to distribute their stuff. And if that isn't a red flag that the entire company was built on sand, I don't know what is. When the company was bought by Viacom Paramount, the home entertainment division was merged with Paramount Home Entertainment. Go Fish Pictures, 2000 to 2007. Founded by Katzenberg as the art house production wing of DreamWorks, Go Fish distributed 2 movies, The Awesome Millennium Actress and the kind of forgotten Ghost in the Shell 2, and co-produced 3, the most infamous being The Chum Scrubber, making $351,000 on its $10 million budget and sealing the division's fate as it was folded and absorbed by the larger studio. Pacific Data Images, 1995 to 2004-ish. PDI was founded in 1980 as a computer animation pioneer, with most of their work being graphics and commercials for TV, before creating short films and characters for T2 and The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror. In 1995, PDI signed a deal with DreamWorks to help make their CGI animated features, getting involved in every CGI film from Ants onward. PDI was officially sold to DreamWorks in 2001, then merged as DWA in 2004 when the animation studio went public. Unfortunately, the longest-lasting subdivision was finally shut down in 2015, off the back of the animated disaster that was Peabody and Sherman, with 500 layoffs and DWA as a whole sold to NBC Universal. and GameWorks, 1996 to 2001. Okay, so I didn't even know GameWorks had anything to do with DreamWorks until I started research for this video. As a kid, this was always the less cool alternative to Dave & Buster's, but it started as a joint venture between Sega, DreamWorks, and Universal Studios. GameWorks had a lot of input from Spielberg early on, who was very interested in video game production during the studio's early days. GameWorks would open dozens of locations, including 6 international arcades, but never reached the level of popularity its owners hoped for. Eventually, DreamWorks sold its portion off in 2001, and GameWorks filed for bankruptcy in 2004, was acquired by several different businesses over the years following, and closed all of its locations during the COVID pandemic, except for its original Seattle arcade, which is still open as of this recording. So what you see here is the full breadth of DreamWorks' multimedia vision of domination that almost completely came up short. With almost all launched within a 5-year span, almost all didn't even last a decade. No single division killed DreamWorks. Instead, it was a death by 1,000 cuts, slowly adding up until hardly anything remained. Jeffrey Katzenberg's creation of DreamWorks was partially to prove that he was worthy of the president role that Eisner had denied him at Disney. With Katzenberg put in charge of the animation division and exercising the same extreme, detail-focused control that had infuriated artists and directors at Disney, you can see the executive's vision for DreamWorks animation change, at first resisting the times and then trying to shape them. DWA was quickly able to woo away many established artists from Disney upon opening, and its first mission was to complete Katzenberg's long unfulfilled wish to adapt the Ten Commandments, which he pitched multiple times at the House of Mouse. The film would become The Prince of Egypt, a hand-drawn retelling of the story of Moses, echoing biblical epics from the golden age of Hollywood. From its lush visuals to star-studded voice cast and soundtrack to massive promotional campaign, Prince of Egypt was designed to launch DWA as the true heir to the Disney Renaissance, one-upping Jeff's old home in a story that many had likened to Katzenberg's own exile. But while it was the first planned animated film, it ended up released after another, Ants, which was fast-tracked and made possible by the acquisition of Pacific Data Images. Ants was specifically made to cut the legs out from under Pixar's A Bug's Life for Disney, managing to actually come out in theaters before the Disney film, despite production starting much later. Katzenberg insisted he knew very little about Bug's Life while making Ants, but reports contradict that, including Katzenberg meeting with Pixar's John Lasseter and Andrew Stanton, and pressing them for information before Ants was announced. The betrayal would shatter Katzenberg's relationship with Pixar, which had remained on good terms after his departure. However, A Bug's Life would do better than both Ants and Prince of Egypt. In the years that followed, you can see DWA both embracing and resisting computer-animated films. On the hand-drawn side, The Road to El Dorado and Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas were both troubled, expensive productions that failed at the box office, with Sinbad losing $125 million for the studio, and becoming a massive threat to the existence of the still shaky company, while Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron launched A Million Horse Girls. But everything changed when DreamWorks Animation got Shrek'd. 2001's Shrek really needs no introduction, but for years, the CGI film hung around the studio's neck like an albatross. It was an extremely troubled production. Constant rewrites, continual changes in tone, multiple creators leaving the film on bad terms, the death of Chris Farley after initially recording his lines for the lead character, and the studio learning on the job. Shrek wasn't just the B project to the other films it saw as prestige. It was punishment for creators reassigned to the film. But when it was released, Shrek was nominated for the Cannes Film Festival's Palme d'Or, won the Academy Award's first ever Best Animated Feature, and netted a $492 million box office. The success of Shrek didn't just reshape DWA's focus as a studio. It redefined animation at the turn of the century with its irreverent, pop culture-laced, often adult humor-laden approach to the medium. Beyond a few Aardman collaborations, DWA became a solely computer-animated studio that embraced franchises, while Disney Animation largely struggled to find financial or critical success. The Shrek franchise was their biggest moneymaker, but Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, Trolls, and my personal favorite, How to Train Your Dragon, all formed the backbone of DWA for nearly 20 years. In 2004, DWA was spun off as its own independent, publicly traded company, cutting off its growing success from the struggling live-action side, and preventing it from being purchased by Viacom in 2005. For the next decade, the independent DreamWorks Animation's massive growth was offset by several setbacks. Shrek 2's big box office led to Katzenberg overpromising shareholders on DVD sales, leading to a stock price drop and SEC investigation when the numbers didn't add up. A massive deal with Netflix turned several franchises into streaming shows. And finally, the underperformance of Rise of the Guardians, Turbo, and Mr. Peabody and Sherman, contrasted against Disney Animation's ongoing resurgence, led to the sale of DWA to NBC Universal on April 28, 2016 for $3.8 billion. Jeffrey Katzenberg's baby had outlasted and far exceeded everything else at DreamWorks. But with its sale, the founder was officially out, succeeded by Chris Meledandri of Illumination as CEO. In the years since, you can really see DWA search for new relevancy to really mixed results. The How to Train Your Dragon franchise has ended. New entries in Trolls, Boss Baby, The Croods, and Spirit have all generally struggled. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish has become one of the studio's best-loved films. And Chicken Run, Megamind, and Kung Fu Panda have all returned to the general horror of their old fans. Almost every DreamWorks animated movie post-2016 is like watching Tetsuya Naito wrestle in a t-shirt. You remember the good matches, but you know they're not really going to give it their all this time. With more upcoming films on the production slate than ever, including the long-dormant Shrek 5, and tons of TV specials and a new theme park, DreamWorks Animation has become a major content machine within the larger Universal Pictures system, so long as the company continues to create merchandisable franchises that serve as an alternative to Disney. DreamWorks Animation will remain a major player in film. The same can't be said for the rest of the studio. Now free from Paramount and in need of a partner, the unthinkable finally happened on February 9th, 2009. DreamWorks Pictures signed a 30-film distribution deal with Walt Disney Studios. While most of the people at both companies that had once been at war with each other were no longer there, it's a sign that the ambitions that gave life to DreamWorks were truly dead. The Disney deal didn't add much oomph to DreamWorks either. Most of the films that followed were co-productions with several different companies to finance their creation. A few succeeded thanks to the involvement of creators like Spielberg, but most didn't leave an impression, as the company's shrinking profits limited them to releasing 3 movies a year. Eventually, the poor performance of most of these films led to Disney not renewing their distribution deal that ended in 2016. Do you hear me? Disney didn't even want DreamWorks. The contrast between DreamWorks' past and present is highlighted even more with what seems to be the studio's final fate, with the return of another familiar name, as 2015 saw Spielberg, Reliance Group, Entertainment One, and Participant Media launch Amblin Partners, with DreamWorks now a brand under it focused on adult audiences. Now truly the boutique label that Paramount thought they should be. There's a lot more distribution deals and financing that happens from here on, but what's most important is that DreamWorks has simply shrunk and shrunk ever since 2009. Now the live-action films remnant of the company exists as little more than name recognition, a shorthand to remind viewers of Spielberg's involvement with the product, and hopefully conjure up a little familiarity. With an average of 2 movies per year released under DreamWorks, the studio's impact on Hollywood is extremely minimal, with the most successful being Green Book in 2018, a commercial success and Best Picture winner at the Oscars, and 1917, similarly successful in 2019 and scoring a lot of nominations. But these, along with many other forgotten films made under DreamWorks in the last decade, can't really be fully attributed to the studio. None could have been fully made under DreamWorks' sole power. And although DreamWorks still exists at the time of this video's publication, it seems like it will be forever relegated to 1 or 2 movies a year and nothing more, as Amblin Entertainment and the larger partnership group's biggest new movies, like Twisters or the upcoming Jurassic World sequel, are being made without them. So the question is, what was DreamWorks' peak? Honestly, it comes pretty early in the studio's lifetime, spanning from 2000 to 2002, with American Beauty winning Best Picture, Director, Actor, Screenplay, and Cinematography in 2000, while also being massively profitable, solidifying the studio's small-budget, awards-focused side of production. Then came Gladiator, a massive hit that also won Best Picture and 4 more Oscars in 2001, and then A Beautiful Mind, another Best Picture winner in 2002 with a strong box office. Meanwhile, Shrek was the studio's most profitable film to date when released in 2001, and won the first Best Animated Feature in 2002. It's this streak of major awards and big financial payoffs that placed DreamWorks as a major studio, briefly taking over as the most recognized player in Hollywood. The films released during this period also really established the DreamWorks style. What Lies Beneath, Almost Famous, Castaway, The Time Machine, Road to Perdition, and The Ring were all big productions with a focus on top-of-the-line prestige that still targeted a broad audience. Meanwhile, Spielberg released a cluster of his own movies with AI, Minority Report, and Catch Me If You Can, all boosting the studio's image as its biggest player fully went to bat for the company. Meanwhile, DreamWorks Television still had its only true hit, Spin City, still airing until 2002, and the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers bringing massive critical acclaim. DreamWorks Records had its most hit albums with Papa Roach's Infest, Nelly Furtado's Whoa Nelly, Lifehouse's No Name Face, Jimmy Eat World's Bleed American, the Isley Brothers' Eternal, the All-American Rejects' self-titled album, AFI's Sing the Sorrow, and Toby Keith's How Do You Like Me Now, Pull My Chain, Unleashed, Shockin' Y'all, and Honky Tonk University going platinum, and more. There were other high points after this, with Shrek 2 making a whopping $928 million in 2004, the studio's biggest hit ever. But it was shortly afterward that DreamWorks, the suddenly massive multimedia giant, started dropping its many different appendages to save money when the experiments weren't working fast enough. It's really the story of a typically successful company's life in reverse. Instead of starting small and building on success, DreamWorks started huge, believing it had already won, only to shrink and shrink as its many branches didn't find the success that was seemingly guaranteed. What happened to the SKG of DreamWorks in the years since? Well, Spielberg has continued to be one of the most successful directors in film history. War of the Worlds and Munich, both released in 2005, were his final films made with the studio, releasing another 10 in the years since so far. But with Spielberg's Amblin partners purchasing the studio, Steve is the only one of the three founders still involved to any degree. While Jeffrey Katzenberg divested from DreamWorks Pictures during its sale to Viacom in 2005, Katzenberg had become the CEO of DreamWorks Animation when it was spun off in 2004. When DWA was sold to NBC Universal in 2016, Katzenberg finally left his role as CEO in favor of a position at DreamWorks New Media. However, he left the position and DreamWorks as a whole in January 2017. But I'm sure everything worked out great for old Jeff. You know what sounds good? Small bites of TV, like a quick bite, a Quibi, if you will. Oh, never mind. And David Geffen, whose roles in DreamWorks outside of the record label were very nebulous beyond exerting control as necessary, largely left the entertainment industry after the company's Reliance-backed restructuring in 2008. Geffen, already a billionaire when the company launched, had become a multi-billionaire and had no use for business dealings. In the years since, Geffen has gone on to fund various institutes, continue to meddle in politics, and become the world's second most polluting individual, thanks to his fleet of super yachts. Now, decades removed from the height of DreamWorks' power and popularity, the time when the SKG studio seemed poised to take over the industry seems like a completely different world. But it was a world that changed beneath DreamWorks' feet. DreamWorks wanted to be an artist-first business, but it always skewed toward the most mainstream, reliable fare possible. It wanted to be cutting edge, but didn't break traditional business models or embrace the internet before its competitors. It wanted to be a big name in every type of media, but struggled to gain a foothold outside of film. And as every business venture failed to reach the level that the company promised to deliver, DreamWorks' dreams simply stopped working. Thanks for watching today's video, and a video that I've promised to make for over a year now. I've previously done videos on the Don Bluth Disney War and the death of the Disney Renaissance, and you can see this as the third part in that trilogy of videos. And I really love making these videos about the behind-the-scenes controversies and successes of studios and creators involved behind many different projects. DreamWorks is such an oddity to me, because for a little while it seemed as if it was the studio. But it began to fail so quickly and without any seeming public reason. But in researching more about everything that happened behind the scenes at DreamWorks, you can really see how unstable the company was from the very start. And through its many different iterations and divisions, there are quite a few great projects that came out of DreamWorks. But as a whole, the company was never really on solid ground. Of course, its biggest success story is DreamWorks Animation. And while that company has had a resurgence in recent years under Universal, it is a very different company than it once was. Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen are three extremely interesting individuals in the history of Hollywood. And here at DreamWorks, you could see them each pursuing their own ambitions, but also limited in what they could actually achieve with the studio. In the end, it's really a company that said it would do a lot and didn't do nearly as much as it promised. But I found it to be fascinating. As I mentioned in the video, one of the biggest sources of help in creating this video was the book The Men Who Would Be King by Nicole LaPorte. And if you're interested in more about DreamWorks, you should absolutely check that out. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of all the strange relationships and ups and downs and successes and failures. It was an invaluable tool in making this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the rise and fall of DreamWorks, and what you would have wished to have happened with the studio, as well as your favorite films, TV shows, and other products from the studio. As always, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my patrons for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video, and exclusive Patreon-only podcast reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves, and working on your dreams.